guys, it's Reagan and welcome back to another video. Today's video I'm very much looking forward to because I look forward to filming this every single year, and that is today I'm going to be chatting about the most intimidating books on my TBR. I like filming this video for a variety of reasons because it makes me confront the books I've been putting off and also have to think about why I'm putting those books off. That being said, if you actually watched my video from last year, I actually got through quite a lot of the books that I initially mentioned, so I also feel like it's a great challenge for myself. Nonetheless, I'm rambling on, but basically this video is comprised of a variety of questions to make me answer why I haven't read a book and why I'm intimidated by it. But without further ado, let's go ahead and dive right in. The first question is, name a book you simply have just not been able to finish. I currently am in the midst of two books that I'm actually really enjoying, but I just haven't gone back to finish quite yet. The first is much longer than the second, and that is actually The Dragon Reborn, which is the third book to the Wheel of Time series, and this one fits rather nicely just in general for this video because while yes, I need to definitely finish the third book to the Wheel of Time, but I also feel like I can slot in the Wheel of Time in general for an intimidating series. I started this series last year and I have to say I am enjoying it. I find it cozy, I find it entertaining, I find it very heartwarming. I particularly like listening to the audiobooks. That being said, I wouldn't say I have fallen headfirst in love with this world or the characters just quite yet. I really like it, but I wouldn't say I love it. And given just the pure length of this series, not just the book length, but also just the amount of books that exist within this world, I'm a little intimidated that I'm gonna make my way all the way through it, and by the end, it's still just going to be a 3-star read for me, if that makes sense. I'm obviously reading it hoping it's going to become a new all-time fave, but the first 3 books I have liked and just not loved. That being said, I do need to finish The Dragon Reborn, which I have been reading for about 6 or 7 weeks now. I've just taken a bit of a pause. The audiobook is good, I am liking it, but for some reason I just have been having a hard time coming back to it. And the second book is wholly just me because what I've read so far, I am really loving this story, and that is A Tale for the Time Being by Ruth Ozeki. I think I've just read quite a few very emotional books that have made me sob recently, and when I picked this up and just reading the first 100 pages or so, I quickly realized that this really had the potential to do that to me again, and I just feel like I needed a bit more time to recharge my emotional mana before I spent it all once more. But this is a dual perspective kind of narrative tale that connects two people across time and space. It follows one woman who encounters a lunchbox which has a journal in it from a young girl who lives in Japan, and then we also follow that young girl as she's sort of writing these entries and we're consuming them as our other main character is. So far it's really engaged me. I just don't think I'm quite emotionally ready to sob my eyes out yet. When I am, I will be finishing this because I do really love the writing so far. And then the rest of the questions all kind of correspond with the sentence of I haven't read this book because ... First up is name a book you haven't read because you haven't had the time. For this, I've collected a few books that are on my shelf that I for sure have been putting off because of the time commitment of starting them. I feel like I'm constantly balancing this desire to wanting to jump into as many new series as possible, but also trying to stay diligent and actually finish series I have started. But it's a real battle that wages on in my life. That being said, these 3 series I really want to start, but I just know I don't have the time to commit to starting a whole new epic series at the moment. The first is The Emperor's Blade by Brian Savely. This is a book I really want to get to before the end of this year, but I just haven't had the time obviously up until this point. I've heard really good things about this particular fantasy series, but particularly more so about the spin-offs, which I always love to see. I love a multi-series fantasy world. It just gets me every time. I don't really know what this series is about. I do believe it follows a group of siblings after their father, the emperor, has died, and they all kind of have different political power and they're all kind of in different places at the start of this book, and I think their lives start to become more intertwined, but I'm not sure. I hear this is excellent. I do want to read it. I just have not had the time. The next is Grace of Kings by Ken Liu. Outside of this being huge and the rest of the books within this series are also huge, I'm also a little intimidated by this particular fantasy story. Another epic, bloody tale. Ken Liu is famous not only for his own works, but he also translates a lot of works within the sci-fi fantasy space. And this series I hear is kind of complicated, a little overly descriptive, and like might not be for everyone. So I'm just a little intimidated by the nature of this book. Outside of the obvious scale and length of it, there's like many factors. And I also just want to read so many things by this author, both his own works and his translated works. It's like hard for me to decide, but this is one that I just don't feel like I have the time for quite yet. And then I feel like the last one is gonna get my friend Starla very angry at me, but it is A Pawn, A Burning Throne by a Shakeh banker. I've just heard so many good things from this book from so many people. This is an Indian-inspired epic fantasy tale. It's also inspired by a well-known mythological tale within Indian folklore, which all those things call out to me. I really do feel like I'm going to love this, but again, it's long, but this is one I do hope to get to at some point this year. I just haven't had the time for it up until this point, you know? The next question is, you haven't gotten to it because it is a sequel. Some of these I should have already gotten to. Some of them I've just recently caught up, so it's not so much my fault. The first books I'm going to show off are books 3 and 4 to the Leviathan Wake series. I've read the first 2 books and I haven't continued on quite yet, but I am really enjoying the Expanse series quite a bit by James S.A. Corey. This is a multi-POV space opera story that combines elements of intergalactic war between different planetary governments and also smaller scale investigations. It has some interesting character moments. It has a super breakneck plot though, and I do feel like I've been saving these for the next time I'm feeling slumpy just because I do burn through them so quickly. But no, I haven't picked up these later installments within this series quite yet. Next is The Fall of Babel by Josiah Bancroft. To be fair, I just finished the 3rd book. This is the 4th and final book within this series. I read it last month, so I've only been delaying this for a short while, though I really do plan on picking this up rather soon because I am just entranced by this very whimsical and dark high fantasy story. Every book has blown me away. It basically follows our main character Senlin as he's traveling through this very perilous tower as he's trying to locate his lost wife. He meets all sorts of different people along the way and gets involved in lots of complicated political plots. I love it. And I haven't read the 4th book yet. I haven't had much time to not read it, but I feel like the excuse is still there. And I should have already gotten to it already. I should have read this right when it came out, which was only a few months ago, but still. And then the last book that qualifies for this question is the one I'm most embarrassed about that I have not read yet, and I do not know why I haven't picked it up. I need to rectify it very soon. And that is The Bone Shard Daughter by Andrew Stewart. This is book 2 to a fantastic debut adult fantasy story following, again, multi-POVs, set in a world where something called bone shard magic exists, which basically allows you to bring to life these sort of bone puppets that can do different types of bidding. There's a lot of political upheaval that occurs in book 1, and that sort of plot line is going to carry over to book 2. I've heard excellent things about this one. I'm really hoping to see more expansion in the world building, and I can't wait. I really liked the first one, and I'm hoping book 2 is even better. And yet, here it sits on my shelf. Why? I don't know. Next is some books you haven't read because they are new. And these 2 books are very new. They are just featured in my most recent book haul. The first is Beasts of a Little Land, which so many of you guys said is going to emotionally destroy me, which, like, glad to hear it. But this is a historical fiction saga taking place over half a century, said to be romantic and all of those things. I can't wait, but I did just buy it, so it makes sense I haven't picked it up quite yet. And then of course I also have The Last Arguments of Kings by Joe Abercrombie. I also just recently wrapped up reading book 2, picked up book 3, the final book in the first Law trilogy. For sure want to get to this very soon as well and continue to read some Joe Abercrombie books throughout the rest of this year. But again, just bought it like 2 weeks ago, so that is why I haven't read it yet. Next is name a book you haven't read because you've read another book by that author and didn't love it. I actually don't have a book that exactly fits this prompt on my shelf, but I do have one that's kind of the reverse. It is a book by an author which I've read before and really loved, but their newer release hasn't been getting as much praise as their prior one, so I've been sort of putting it off, and that is The Heart Principle by Helen Huang. I loved Helen Huang's The Kiss Quotient. I thought it was romantic and steamy and fun and just full of all of the rom-com stuff that you want in an adult romance story. This book though, while the synopsis definitely called out to me, I've just heard doesn't hit the spot quite as much, and I've also heard it's really like much more emotional than you would expect going into it. Again, I'm kind of putting a pause on sad books at the moment, but you just wouldn't guess based on the cover. Does this look like a book that will ruin your life? I'm not so sure. Next is a book you haven't read because you haven't been in the mood to read it. And for me, that book is Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel. This is a book that I feel like I'm going to like. It won the Pulitzer, the sequel won the Pulitzer. It's a very lauded work of historical fiction with a lot of actual historical research embedded within this tale. Particularly, it's set in England, and it basically follows a lot of the unrest that occurs during King Henry VIII's reign, as well as the civil war that occurs with Cromwell and kind of the rise of all of those politics. I actually really like English monarchical history, and I actually studied a lot of it in school, so this very specific, dense historical fiction story does call out to me, but I also know it's not going to be the lightest read in the world, if you know what I mean, and it might take me a while, and it's also a book that I really, really want to pay attention to and possibly annotate as I go along. So I just want to be in the right headspace. I almost feel like this could be a bit of like a signed reading for myself, like a little scholarly moment for just me, myself, and I, if you know. But yeah, I have a lot of friends that love this. I feel like I'm going to really enjoy it myself, but I just have to pick it up at the right time. Next is a book you haven't read because it's huge. For that, I'm going with Malice by John Gwynne. Again, this book is long, but I'm more speaking to how long the entire series is. I'm curious if anyone agrees with me here, but sometimes I feel like starting a super hyped fantasy series can be extra intimidating in its own way, outside of even just like possibly disagreeing with the masses and getting a few mean comments, which does happen to me every once in a while, but it's more like I always pick something up wanting to love it, so it's very disappointing to me when I don't like it as much as I feel like I should. And then I also just feel left out, you know? It's like you're witnessing the party from a distance, but you weren't invited. That's how I feel when I don't love something as much as everyone else does. That being said, the Malice series I feel like could possibly be a new home run for me, but there are so many books. I do know this is a more gruesome combat-centered fantasy book series, which I would say I'm much more someone who leans towards like heavier political intrigue and cleverness and characters kind of maneuvering around other characters versus like brute force. Though I feel like if the balance is there, I will still for sure enjoy it. I did also read Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne recently, so I've had a taste for his writing style. Again, I liked it. I wouldn't say I was like over the moon with it. Nonetheless though, this is on my TBR for the year, but I am rather intimidated by it, and I hope I like it. But if I do like it, then I have so many books I now all of a sudden have to read, which is intimidating in its own way as well. Next is a book that you bought because of the cover, but has since realized that the reviews aren't so strong. For this, I'm going with The Muse by Jessie Burton. I bought this one because of the cover, and it is beautiful, but also the author. I've read another book by Jessie Burton in the past and really enjoyed it. Unfortunately, this particular novel just wasn't quite as well received as her first one. I've owned this book probably for 7 years. This is one of the oldest books on my TBR for sure, and I do plan on reading it because I do really enjoy Jessie Burton's really lyrical and transportive writing. This is a book that I also feel like kind of slips between time periods and has to do with art and creation as well as mystery. I don't know, it sounds intriguing. I haven't picked it up yet. It definitely calls out to me from a synopsis point of view, so much so that I haven't unhauled it even though I've owned this book for so many years. That being said though, maybe I'll read it soon. Maybe I'll read the oldest books on my TBR for a reading vlog and we'll see how it shakes out. But nonetheless, this for sure is on the list. And then the very last book I'm going to talk about is simply the most intimidating book on my TBR. And this is the same year over year, and I think until I actually read it, it will persist to be so. That is Gardens of the Moon by Steven Erikson, or book 1 of the Malazan series. Listen, there's so many reasons why I could talk about why I'm intimidated to read Malazan. Outside of the incredibly opinionated readers when it comes to the series, rightly so, no judgment there. It's also just an intimidating work of fantasy for just the scale of it in and itself. It is heavily focused on world building. It has expansive plot lines and locations, and it doesn't necessarily connect all of the threads throughout the narrative. From what I understand, you can be jumping around from book to book to book, and the large scale nature of the conflict, it just takes a while for things to kind of pay off, which honestly I don't necessarily mind, but for the most part, I think we can all agree on that when you're picking up the Malazan series, it is a commitment, and it's also one where I don't want to read one book a year and slowly make my way through it because there are so many details and I just don't want to forget stuff as I go along. So I feel like it's important to kind of read things back to back to back to make sure you kind of get the best experience with it. So I'm not sure when I'm going to read this. This is for sure one of the most intimidating series to me personally, but I'm still very interested in it and it's for sure calling out to me, and I know it's one of those series I will pick up in my lifetime. Alrighty guys, those are the most intimidating books on my TBR. Let me know down below some books that you have that you're a little intimidated to read, as I would love to know, and I will see you guys soon with another video soon. Goodbye!